All right, so I want to show you how to animate a feature, and there are many characteristics in CSS you can animate. So you can do size, location, rotation, color. There's all manner of properties that you can mess around with. So I'm just going to show you one, and then when it comes to the actual assignment, look at the assignment parameters, and it'll tell you how many you have to do and of what kind and so forth. If we look here on W3 Schools at CSS3 animations, we can see that there's a number of different pieces of code to learn. So keyframes is going to be an important one, as will animation name, duration, delay, iteration count, and so forth. You can also note here that these are newer characteristics for CSS and might not be perfectly supported by all browsers, right? So the more funky CSS we use, older machines that haven't been updated might have some trouble seeing it, just so you know. So you can take a look at this page and it'll tell you all about it. I also found a really great page right here. I'll put all these links in the YouTube comments, but how to create pure CSS illustrations. And if you take a look, for folks that really spend their time with it, they can make something truly amazing. And that's just a static image, right, before we even animate it. So lots of good resources online. I'll show you the way that I did it. So I'll come back over here. Nothing is animated yet. And we'll head into Atom, and you'll see that I just have a couple more elements that are commented out. We also have these up here that we did not talk about in the previous video. So what I want my eye to do, or at least the pupil, is to start at the center. I want it to look left for a second, I want it to look right for a second, and then come back to the middle. And I want that animation to repeat as long as there's some kind of user input, in this case hovering over the skull itself. So the first thing I'll do is write at keyframes, and then I give my animation a name. So I'm going to call this lookabout. Okay, now I'll go to 0% is where is the object going to start. So at first, left 20 pixels is exactly where that pupil starts out, right? That's the same as when we define where the pupil is before it's animated. Then within 5% of our overall time, which is established here, see animation duration 3 seconds. So 5% of 3 seconds, whatever that is how long it's going to take to move the pupil from left 20 to left 30. And keep in mind that left 30 means farther from the left, so this will mean that the eye will look right first. So it'll move 10 pixels in 5% of 3 seconds. It'll pause there for a little bit, and then at 30%, it'll start moving back and make it all the way back to 10 pixels. So now it's looking to the left-hand side. It's going to pause some more, so you can see I've doubled over these locations over this percentage of the elapsed animation. And then finally to look back towards the center and wait there for a little while. And you need it to wait back in the center again, or else there will be a weird hiccup in the animation. If you copy over the way that I've done it, you can try it and see how it turns out on your end. Okay, so I've established how that animation is going to go and the name of the animation. Then I come back up here to the object that is going to be changed. In this case, I'm doing position, but you could certainly do color and scale and all sorts of other things. And I have these 4 lines. So I've said the name of the animation is lookabout. The animation duration is 3 seconds. That one I'll come back to in a second. And animation iteration count is infinite. So as long as I have I'm triggering the animation, it should just keep going and going and going and looping forever. Now down here at the bottom, because what I'm interested in is not this skull looking around all the time, but just when I hover the mouse, I'm saying as long as you hover over the div ID skull, and see the pseudo class is hover, go ahead and set the animation state to running, as in, going forward. And then by default, I want the pupil to not be running. And so what I could do here is say animation play state pause, but that's actually not going to do us any good. So part of the issue with this that I was having the most trouble with was I wanted to animate the pupil on hover, but before I figured this out, you had to hover over the pupil itself. So once you hovered over the pupil, it would immediately look away, and how is your audience to know that they're supposed to get their mouse over the top of this little tiny area, right? So this is kind of an Easter egg, right? People would have to be searching around the site, but I want to hover over the skull itself, so that's a lot of surface area, and that will activate the lookabout, and that's why this is required. So I'm saying, don't look at me, the pupil, to decide whether or not the animation should be running. Instead, look to my parent element. That's why I'm saying inherit. And if you recall, we're inheriting from I, and then I is inheriting from skull because these are parent and child elements. So I have to do this twice. So here I say the pupil inherits, and what comes before pupil is the I. And then I look up here towards I, and then I say play state inherit again. So now I'm kicking it all the way back up to skull. And then when I look at skull, I say animation play state paused. So you have to kind of understand how these things are working together to know where to look, right? If you just landed in my document, it might be a little bit confusing where these things are located. But because I want skull's hover to control whether or not things are playing, and because the animation play state does not automatically pass on to the children elements, I have to tell the animation in skull, which does not yet exist, to pause. Then I define the animation down here, but I say look back up the chain towards skull if you want to know whether you should be playing or not. And then the only time that we are playing is in the pseudo class situation where skull is also hovered, and then the animation play state is running. So I'll save this, head back out here to Firefox, and you can see by default nothing's happening. Reload it, nothing's happening, but then if I hover over the pink area, which is the skull, this will look back and forth. Now, this isn't foolproof. For example, in terms of interactivity, if I hover over the crossbones, nothing's going to be happening. And so I think people might, be a little bit confused if this was like a primary piece of navigation on the site, right? It would be a little too confusing to know how to interact with it. But because this is sort of a funny, goofy animation, I'm perfectly fine with making it a little harder to find. Now, when you do it, because of course I need to grade your work and know what a great job you did, you should definitely leave behind some notification that says, hey, go ahead and hover over this, or make sure that you click on that or whatever in order to activate your animation so that we all know where to go to see it. And then apart from that, the world's really your oyster, right? So if you find this to be extraordinarily complicated and you're finding coding to be really difficult, just try to make a nice, simple, well-functioning item. If you've been getting all your work done very quickly and you're looking for a little bit more of a challenge, now's really the time where you can spread your wings and make a self-portrait or make a photorealistic car, whatever it is you're going to try. And then I'm also very eager to see people just get onto W3 Schools and to look up properties that I'm not necessarily walking you through super directly in my videos. For example, when I was doing this, I didn't know all these properties off the top of my head. So I was doing some research on W3 Schools about animation and keyframes. I just looked up CSS rotation. The first thing that popped up was this. I copied the line and used it, had to noodle a little bit and just figured it out. Similarly with playstate, I was having a lot of trouble figuring out how do I roll over a parent element and cause an animation that's just in a child element. So, even for folks like myself who are professionals in this area, you just still do a lot of Googling. And so a lot of this is just learning how to ask the questions on Google. Again, how do I get this thing to go on forever as opposed to a specific number of iterations? I look it up on W3 Schools and scroll down, and then I can see somewhere down here that one of the property values is infinite, and yes, that's what I want. So I pick it up and so forth. Great, so I'm really looking forward to seeing what you come up with. This is the time when we're going to start to really break away from make a div that's 200 pixels and white and do exactly as I say. And now you can really, let loose and get super creative.